Hey everyone, this is part 6 of your science fair experiment, and this part is where you have already conducted your experiment and now you are taking your information, your data that was a part of your experiment, and putting it into a chart and a graph. And so I'm going to scroll back to procedures, because during your procedure, and you're looking at number 7 and number 8 here, is that you are measuring the plant with a metric ruler. Oops. And then recording your data in a record book. And I'm going to show you an example of my record book. That's an example that has the picture of the graph. And so when you're using, or when you're completing your data into a chart or a graph, you want to make sure you're using, and you can use different tools. And there's some examples here in this second bullet right here where it says use the Graph Club or Inspiration Program. Those are examples of programs on the internet that you can use to help you to graph your results. And you want to make sure you use the right type of graph for your data. And I used a bar graph. Bar graphs are pretty easy. So I'm going to show you an example of my bar graph, so you'll know a little bit what to put in yours. And this is where you're bringing in your math. You're bringing in those math skills, how to draw a bar graph. And so here's an example of mine. I'll show you here on the screen. This is an example of my bar graph. And so on this bar graph, there's a lot of parts here. So I'm going to show you a few parts, and I'm going to see if I can change. Here, I'm going to do it in blue here. And so there's different parts of this bar graph. I'm going to circle right here. This is my title. This is the title of my bar graph. This is where I am identifying my purpose for my science fair project, which is caffeine's effect on pea plants. There's also labels here. Labels, here's an example of a label right here, because this label is telling what these numbers mean right here. You see these numbers right here, 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300. That is the label for that side of the bar graph, which is called my y-axis. It's a y-axis for bar graph. Over here is called the x-axis. And over here, this is going to be an example of my label for this one. It's almost a key, because the red represents the water that I use for my pea plants, and the blue represents the caffeine. I didn't completely color it in. I just wanted to show you an example of what this looks like. And then I put right here, if you can see this little dotted line across my notebook, across my graph, this is where the plant started. If you remember in the directions, to start at about 100 centimeters high. And of course, I have that growth of centimeters. Let's see if I can get a different color where you can see it a little bit better. Right here, centimeters, because that's the metric system. So I'm measuring the height of the plants in centimeters. And so this is an example of a bar graph, and you can kind of see, it's easy to see my results from the plants. And of course, you saw, as you can see the results right here, that the caffeine grew a little bit more, or caused the plants to grow a little bit more than the water. So you can kind of see how much. I drew a line just to get a flat line so you can see if the the plants that were watered with just water, most of them were about 200. There's one little short guy here, one little short plant that didn't grow all the way, kind of like this one little caffeine guy, didn't grow all the way, but most of them were about 300 centimeters tall. And so you can see the difference using this bar graph. You can see the effect of the caffeine versus the water. And the reason that you do a lot of different trials, see, I had 4 trials for water, I had 4 trials for caffeine, because you might have these little outlier, what's called an outlier result from each one. So you want to get a pretty close average as to what the results were by watering with both caffeine and water. And then the final step of your scientific method, which will be in part 7 of your video, is writing down the results and writing a conclusion. Is where you explain your